Hi, folks. Welcome to another edition of Post Media's Inside the Marble Palace. I look at the Saskatchewan legislature's goings on. I'm Murray Mandryk, political columnist for the Regina Leader Post. With me, as usual, Arthur White-Crummey, who is our legislative reporter, and Zak. And I'm not going to try his name this week because it's torturous, isn't it? Zak Vescera. How's that?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Sure, why not? Of the Star Phoenix, smart, bright young guy whose name I can't pronounce, but does a one hell of a job on the COVID stuff. I am going to start with Arthur because I think you did the last story about the reopening, and be honest with you, Arthur, I don't quite get it. I don't get what the premier is actually saying about why we're reopening, even though we haven't quite reached the 70% mark. And maybe why I don't get it is why other people don't. It's also why other people don't get it. But what is his explanation of the 68.86% or whatever we're at right now is close enough on first doses of people over 12 years old, and we can just go ahead? Can you just review that for the masses, please?
Yeah, so this happened over the weekend, and let's keep in mind there's sort of two targets here for step 3 of the reopening roadmap. There's a target to lift all the restrictions except for sort of mandatory masking and very large gatherings like spectator sports at Mosaic Stadium. That was 70% of all adults 18 and over. We did meet that over the weekend, and they announced they were going to move forward with step 3. But the next day on Sunday, the premier announced that we were going to get rid of all restrictions, including those on large gatherings like Mosaic Stadium, so our beloved riders can play to a full crowd when we come to August, and further also mandatory masking. That's all gone. He announced that on Sunday. In 3 weeks, July 11th, those restrictions are gone. Funny thing is, though, we didn't actually meet the target where, according to his own reopening plan, was supposed to dictate that. So it was supposed to be 70% of all people 12 and over. As of Sunday, when he made the announcement, we were actually under 69%. So even rounding up, which they have a habit of doing at the health ministry, we weren't actually at that 70% target. So none of this was really explained, over the weekend, except for a very short press release. The premier did make an appearance for a ceremony at, I believe, Government House yesterday, and he was asked that would be Monday. And he was asked a few questions about what the rationale was for jumping the gun on his own plan. Pretty short remarks. He basically just said Saskatchewan people have been looking forward to this. They had July 11th in their mind as the date when all of these restrictions were going to lift. Well, they only had July 11th in their mind because the premier and the government had put that on all of their messaging as the likely date. It was never the definite date, and the trigger was supposed to be that 70% target for all people 12 and up, which we have still not met as of Tuesday. So apart from that, he basically just said, we're going to get there soon. The way things are going, probably over the next week, we're going to get to 70%. That's not even clear. We really seem to be plateauing in terms of our first doses, doing better on second doses, but even that leaves something to be desired. So the clarification is not really there yet, and thankfully we're going to get a press release, a press conference a couple days late here on Thursday, where hopefully we'll be able to ask a few more direct questions, and I know Zak is going to be there in virtual spirit.
Oh, good. Well, I'm not hung up on the numbers either, because whether it's 69 or 70%, it's about the same. Here's where I'm hung up. I see us petering out quite significantly, and I get that they're reporting every second day in terms of the number of vaccinations right now. But according to Phil Tank's story, Phil Tank, our friend and colleague at the Star Phoenix, just loves numbers. We had less than 900 first dosers yesterday of slightly less than 7,000 total vaccinations. Now, under that formula, that'll take another 2 weeks, but that's less consequential to me than what seems to be happening, which is that they seem to be kind of maxing out on the number of people that they can reach. So I guess the question to you, Zach, is that the case? If that's the case, why is that the case? Why, despite the fact that I think they've actually had some pretty good strategies about going into inner cities and smaller communities and aiming it right at communities, vaccination clinics at sports fields, community centers, seems to be the right way to go. It just doesn't seem to be quite paying off yet. Who are we missing right now in terms of vaccinations, and why are we missing them?
I think you're absolutely correct, Murray, that the rate of first dose inoculation in Saskatchewan has been slowing down really significantly. The way I kind of like to think about this is it's like a giant tree full of fruit. And most of the fruit on the tree is low-hanging fruit that's easy to pick. These are the people who are willing to drive out of their way to get a COVID-19 vaccine. Then there's some fruit that's just not ripe. These are people who are vaccine hesitant or refusing. We don't actually know how many people these are, but they definitely exist. And then finally, you've got some fruit that's ready to be picked, but it's at a part of the tree that you can't reach. Maybe it takes a little bit of time or some special tools. And that's kind of what the health authority has been trying to do recently. They've been driving to inner cities and poorer communities where we know for a fact the vaccination rate, according to the SHA's own neighborhood data, which they are collecting but will not share with us, is lower, significantly lower. A couple weeks ago, the rate in sort of the downtown core of Saskatoon was 48%, compared to a city average of 67%. We know that they've been hosting pop-up clinics, places where you can just turn up and get a vaccine. I went to one in Saskatoon this past weekend where they had ice cream and a DJ and like kettle corn as ways of kind of tempting people to come and join and making a spectacle of it. They put it right in the heart of downtown with the idea of getting people who might be getting off work on their lunch break from a cafe. One of the doctors there actually did tell me that a barista at a neighboring cafe right outside the clinic had not had their first dose of vaccine. And so on their lunch, they whisked them right out, gave them a shot, sent it back in. I saw a street busker performing in downtown Saskatoon stop playing, go get a vaccine, and then immediately return to busking. So clearly these strategies are absolutely working for some people, and they're getting the vaccines out there, but they're not really doing it as fast, I think, as many people would like. There seems to be a real barrier in terms of being in the right place at the right time, and also just having the resourcing to explain to people why they need to get the vaccine. I think that's part of it too. A lot of
so go ahead. I'm going to get back to Arthur in a minute, but this is interesting to me. Is it because we're just not being aggressive enough, Zach? Is it because we don't know how to be aggressive enough in terms of reaching those communities, or we're not speaking to the right leaders in the communities to get people out? I know that they, in certain places, they've actually been going door to door and doing some things, and it just kind of fascinates me that it's not working a little bit better than it is.
I think so much of this comes down to very practical logistics that are really hard to time out in a province like Saskatchewan. Like the door-to-door campaign, for example, that's something they did in Lash, Saskatchewan, which is dealing with a mix of, being kind of a remote community with lots of distance between where people live, as well as a lot of vaccine hesitancy in the community itself. So they just went door to door, and that's how they did the vaccine there. And they've talked about doing that in other parts of the north too. But across the north, what we're hearing from some northern leaders is that transportation is a huge issue. Not everyone has the ability to drive like 2 hours one way and then 2 hours back just to get a vaccine. Internet access is spotty in some places. So how are you supposed to book a vaccine on the website? There's all these very practical considerations that come into it that you and I maybe don't think about. In the core neighborhoods, for example, one thing that was brought up by one doctor I talked to was, look, after we crack open a vial of vaccine and reconstitute it, we have 6 hours to administer it before it goes bad. So if we're talking about people who are maybe don't have a place to sleep that night, don't know where their next meal is coming from, are they going to be able to keep an appointment within that range of a few hours? Is that something that's kind of feasible or realistic for them? Ideally, we have a situation where you can just walk in anytime and get a vaccine, but we don't yet have the supply to do that.
Arthur, I really like Zach's analogy about the monkeys and the low-hanging bananas, and because that's kind of who we are sometimes certainly in this business. You work with a giant silverback.
Are you comparing the government to monkeys? Maria?
Actually, I was comparing us to monkeys and bananas.
I think you added that little bit of color to
I did not bring up monkeys in my analogy. I didn't remember specifying that.
Yes, but at least in this case, I also like the notion that the bananas are getting a little bit overly ripe, and that's problematic. Why is the premier not getting this, Arthur? I guess maybe have we not put it to him enough or directly enough in as a province, as reporters asking the question, look, we have a problem here. And I think Zach actually, in all seriousness, is spot on. We have hit the low-hanging fruit. We have gotten to where it's easiest, where people can actually literally drive to clinics that are called drive-throughs and get their vaccine. But what happens afterwards? I don't know if that question has been put properly to the premier and others to force them an answer. But I think even more significantly, I don't know if that's what they're thinking about. And if that's not what they're thinking about, why is it not something that they would find a little bit more problematic than it would seem to be? Because if we still have 30% of this province that isn't vaccinated in that 12 and up category, and a significant portion of the whole total population, because we've got an exceptional population under 12 years old compared to most provinces. I think right now we're at, in terms of total population, someplace near 60. If we have 40% of Saskatchewan not vaccinated, why is that not, in your mind, or according to the premier's explanation, a little bit more alarming? That is one statistics where we're certainly lacking and falling behind. And what is the possible explanations from the premier as to that specific issue of why we're not doing better in terms of getting to people that may or may not be vaccinated in higher numbers here than elsewhere?
I mean, I get the sense that they are concerned about this and that they're taking it seriously and that it's a high priority for them. I mean, just last week, I believe it was, we got that first dose vaccination strategy that they obviously put a lot of foresight into. Zach was describing some of the festivals and gimmicks that they're setting up to try to attract people to get vaccinated. It seems like it's working to some extent. They had Gaynor the Gopher here in Regina getting vaccinated, obviously publicized that to a large extent. I'm not sure the vaccine is indicated for gophers, but clearly it's a small sacrifice for him to make to encourage people to get vaccinated. So, I mean, it does seem as though, at least from the standpoint of SHA logistics, this is something that they're putting a lot of resources and a lot of attention to. If you're asking why the premier is choosing to move ahead with his reopening roadmap when, you know, coverage isn't necessarily where we might like to see it, I mean, it is very close to the thresholds. Essentially, everything except for the last target has been met, and we haven't seen a major upsurge in cases despite that 30% of the 12 plus population not being covered. So long as that's the case, so long as we're not seeing the kinds of problematic case and hospitalization numbers that we saw in the second and third wave, I mean, I don't see any political drawback to them continuing forward with their reopening plan that they've obviously, you know, invested a lot of political capital into. And I think, and to finish it off, sure, I don't think that the NDP has even really held them accountable for this, because I was talking to the NDP's health critic the other day, and she didn't really want to bite on the fact that they were jumping the gun on these targets and ignoring their own reopening plan. I mean, she criticized it with some of the same criticisms they've used before, that it doesn't include other targets, it doesn't include case numbers, it doesn't include hospitalizations and variants. But she said, hey, it's just 1%. Not really that much of a criticism. Yeah. I get the sense that they've done their research and they know that there's not a lot of political points to be scored in pushing to keep the province closed right now. That's the sense that I get.
I'll get back to you in a second, Zach, because the consequences of this are something we need to explore before we leave this topic. But I think Arthur is probably dead on in terms of the political point. I think it's like holding back a giant dam at this particular point. And I think there might be a sense within the government that they're fearful it might break, that they can only basically go along so long with keeping things shut down, with people being forced to wear masks, or at least that's the feedback I'm sensing that the government is getting from this. And you're right, like 36 cases yesterday being the Tuesday is a low number, a very low number of testing, by the way, but still we're into that summer season. Vaccines are proving to working. In your mind, Arthur, are you sensing right now that the Premier is caught betwixt and between the whole notion of, look, I need to basically show that what we're doing has worked, is working related to vaccinations, yet someplace down the road there is this, as you say, legitimate worry about what happens if we don't get sort of higher numbers. At this particular point, maybe they're living in the here and now and not really having to worry about those numbers when we're looking at lower hospitalizations, lower per day cases, at that such. Do you think that's where their heads are at right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think they are concerned about the vaccination rates, and I think it's something that is a high priority for them. But the cases have not brought us to a crisis point. Obviously, they're trending in the right direction where they need to seriously rethink jettisoning their plan, or even necessarily abiding by it in a completely literal sense, because the plan was always flexible. It always had various escape hatches. It never had anything more than vaccinations, and I think that they're going to continue on that path until there's a clear headwind in terms of case numbers or hospitalizations, which is not showing any sign of happening anytime soon.
Okay, Zach, let's look at that for the perspective of possible outcomes, though, because two factors are of interest to me in play here. One of which is that we are dealing with new variants that spread more quickly, cause more damage in terms of hospitalizations. We know the people getting sick and winding up in hospitals are those who have not been vaccinated. So I guess I'd like to get a sense of what you're hearing in terms of the possible outcomes of this. And maybe if you can, and I don't know if you can because I never asked you this, but can we possibly compare that to how we're doing elsewhere? Because I see Manitoba's opening up the door, having achieved its 71% today. Obviously, Alberta beat us to the punch in terms of its July 1st opening. And there's this constant comparison from the other direction, from the other side of the argument. Well, why aren't we doing as well as places in the Atlantic bubble, et cetera? So I guess the first question in a twofold part is, what is the possible concerns related to the new variants at the current vaccination levels? And given those concerns, why are other provinces seeing at least a higher first dosage take up? As you pointed out earlier, we're doing better on the second dosage, but why are the other provinces seeing a higher percentage on the first take up now compared to this province?
I'll start with the first question there. The real wild card in all of this is the so-called Delta variant, which was first detected in India. And the proof of that pudding is the experience in the United Kingdom, which actually had to put its reopening on pause because of a high number of Delta cases. The Delta variant is a pain in the butt because if you have only had the first dose of the Pfizer or AstraZeneca vaccine, according to data from Public Health England, you will only have a protection rate of about 33%. The great news is that having both doses of either of those vaccines, according to information from the same agency, gave you a very high rate of protection. But the majority of people in this province who have been vaccinated have only had that first dose. That's where the good news comes in, which is what you point out there, Murray. We actually have a pretty strong rate of second dose uptake, possibly because the rate of first dose uptake has been very low. A lot of the keeners, as you call them, are going to get their second doses as soon as they are eligible for it, are getting those in the arm, and that could mean that we're better protected. But I think the Delta variant is probably very much the wild card that could turn this whole thing around, especially if it happens to emerge in an unvaccinated population, of which there are many, like we've discussed right here. In terms of why the first dose uptake has been lower in Saskatchewan, I think that's an incredibly complicated question, and it's very difficult to answer. It could come down to just the way that we've done our vaccination campaign, which has always been very geared towards mass clinics up until this point, and not much. The focus on individual communities, I think, has been more pronounced recently. It could be that we just have more remote and rural parts of the province where the vaccine is hard to get. It could be that, as some surveys suggest, there's genuinely just a higher rate of vaccine hesitancy in this province. But whatever it is, it does seem like it's kind of critical at this point to get those rates nice and high. You hear some doctors suggest that we would want to ideally have a vaccination rate of 85% or higher. We're not there right now. And I think that what's going to be crucial to watch over the next few months is, do we get there before the fall, when some have suggested that we might see another wave of COVID-19 infections?
Is this anywhere in the thought process in government, in your mind, Arthur, where they have an end goal in your mind, or that maybe they're not talking about too much, or that they realize this is going to be sort of the maximum area and they're just not telling us yet? Because I'm intrigued. The reason I ask this, I'm intrigued by one thing in the Premier's messaging, and that's this business of let's get the job done. Well, if you're reopening stuff, it's hard to get the job done because there's not much of the carrot and the stick, either the carrot or the stick, I guess, in terms of forcing people to go to clinics or encouraging them to go to clinics. So in your mind, is there some place along the line, and I'm not asking for a number, but do you think it might be a case where there's a realistic sense in government that we're only going to get to 85 or 90% in Saskatchewan, and that'll have to be good enough?
I've never heard that number in terms of what the upper limit is, and I think that they would be very hesitant to reveal it to us. If they do have anything from studies or surveys or any other evidence. Again, pretty much the messaging is everybody should get their shot. There's no reason to wait, and ultimately, if you choose not to, you're putting yourself at risk, because we are reopening. The virus is still here, and ultimately, it seems like the messaging is that's on you, not the government.
Well, and it is. What about doctors and scientists that you've talked to, Zach? Do they have a sense in terms of a critical number that we have to reach? Because that's still the question is, okay, we're doing fine, we're reopening and everything else, but where does this leave us, and what do we need to achieve? What's your sense in terms of the scientific community, I guess, in terms of where they would like to see Saskatchewan?
I think there's a mix of excitement and trepidation among a lot of people, and not just in the scientific community. Folks who talk to are very quick to express that these vaccines are really good. The case numbers falling is obviously fantastic. So is hospitalizations falling. Things appear to be heading in the right direction, but they also throw a heavy degree of caution in there. And I think the thing that probably raises the most anxiety, Murray, is the fact that we are getting rid of the provincial indoor masking mandate on July 11th. A lot of people see that as being a pretty easy thing to do that really does reduce the risk of transmission a lot in indoor public spaces. And I think a bellwether of that is the fact that the Saskatchewan Health Authority has very strongly indicated that it will not drop the masking requirement after July 11th, that it will remain a reality in SHA facilities and in long-term care, even though long-term care homes have probably the highest vaccination rates in the entire province at this point. So I think that's kind of a bellwether for me. In terms of whether people are happy about it or angry about the reopening plan, I think most folks I've talked to are sort of seeing both sides. They recognize that the current trends are very good. There's a lot of hope in the air, and maybe a lot of public frustration at this point, desire to get back to normal. But no one, I think, is going to be declaring victory on July 11th.
Well, and that's actually a really interesting point. Perhaps a good place to leave it off, because we're running out of time today. But I'm not even sure the Premier is basically saying right now that July 11th is the end date. That he hasn't really talked about the that level of end game in terms of when COVID is over. That he's only talked about, okay, this is where we're at when we're at completion of what amounts to the reopening stage. I guess this gives us a good excuse to keep on talking about this subject forever and a day. And unfortunately, that's about all the time we've had to do so today. Zach, Arthur, thanks for the great job as usual. And we'll see you, I guess, next time on Inside the Marble Palace.
See you, Murray.
Bye, Murray.